Hi there, Sec4s. If you're looking to improve your understanding of crime and punishment, you've come to the right place. In this video, we'll explore the various aspects of this complex topic, discussing examples and issues that will help deepen your knowledge. By the end of this video, you'll have gained a solid understanding of crime and punishment that you can use. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. So what we had done last year was that we had actually done an essay each term that had to do with crime and punishment. So in term 1, we looked at the impact of media on crime. On term 2, we looked at things like the death penalty and the issues that were involved and debated with regards to the death penalty. And in term 3, we were looking at how some people were getting away with crime. So whether or not the justice system and the criminal justice system is actually a fair one. You can also look at current affairs, where we looked at white-collar crime, and that will actually help with talking about the different types of crime, as well as whether or not we view the types of crime with the same kind of severity. So what I'm going to do in this video is to actually go through the larger themes and debates that generally tend to be talked about for crime and punishment. So if you are able to understand these themes and these debates, these tensions, you should actually be in a good position to talk about it and to write about it. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to go through in today's video is to look at the 3 large components of crime. And these 3 large components of crime kind of are segmented according to the videos and to the lessons that you did last year, right? So remember the idea of the reasons of crime, impact of certain disruptors on crime, the idea of punishment and the issues behind it, as well as whether or not the criminal justice system is fair. So what you want to think about when we think about crime and punishment, the first thing that you want to think about is always to do with the reasons for crime. Okay, so when you're thinking about the reasons of crime, you should think of it in 2 different ways. The first will be what within a person causes the person to commit a crime or to offend, right? So some things like passion, right? You are very, 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 very angry, okay? And that causes you to commit certain kinds of crime. Or you are very, 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 very greedy, right? And you want money, or you want more of something, right? That also causes you to become this criminal mastermind and, scam people or something like that. Or you're addicted to something and you either need it, so you commit crime to be able to get it, or you need it and it costs money and you commit crime in order to get the money so that it can feed your addiction. So these essentially are, from within the person, 3 key reasons why crime is committed. Okay, externally, you can also think about reasons like what is happening around the individual, the social reasons, where the individual lives, for instance. So if the individual lives in, let's say, a neighborhood that is very poor, right, and there are no real jobs available, then the idea of committing crime might be a reason why the individual chooses to commit crime or chooses a life of crime, because there's no other choice. Or things like the individual is born into a family where there isn't enough direction because it is a disruptive family in one way or other, right? Whether one of the parents are absent or both parents are absent, and there's a lack of a role model. And that also creates external situations that actually can bring about the committing of crime. Okay, so that might be your social reasons. Then you might have also political and economic reasons. So there's a lot of disruption in the country. There's civil war, right? The civil war in itself, and you, let's say, volunteering to join a militia group, that is crime, right? You taking advantage of disruption to commit crime. You taking advantage of civil war or taking advantage of a natural disaster or something, and kidnapping children and traffic children, right? That's also taking advantage of the political, economic, social political situation to commit crime. Okay, now the last one could be also the idea of the new disruptors. You have media, which would possibly legitimize certain kinds of lifestyle, to normalize certain kinds of behavior, some of them which are actually against the law. Or you could also see it as, oh, because of the technology available, I think I can get away with these things. I think I can break into the school database and alter my grades. That's a crime, if you didn't already know, right? So it's these sorts of things, right, where you have external reasons that also cause or contribute to an individual committing crime. Okay, so the next couple of slides that we are going to be looking at, I'm not going to go through it because these are content slides, but the next couple of slides will actually go into these reasons in greater detail. So you need to know these reasons, and you need to know how each of these reasons, right, especially the external ones, these are disruptors. Okay, something that is happening that causes a change in the person or causes a change in the individual or the society that makes the individual or the society more predisposed to either committing crime or crime occurring. So the second area that you want to actually consider once you are familiar with these causes of crime would be to actually consider and to come to a conclusion, right, where you stand on these particular issues. Okay, 1, are these forms of punishment effective? 2, are these forms of punishment ethical? 3, consider this: what is the cost of the punishment? So we could possibly be talking about financial cost. We could also be talking about social cost to the society. So you need to consider these things as you are thinking about the kinds of punishment that are available. Okay, so the next slide, we're going to look at this, right, the kinds of punishments that occur. So things like, for instance, monetary punishment. So that's the most straightforward. You get fined for jaywalking, right? Rehabilitation. So rehabilitation essentially means you have some sort of opportunity, some sort of second chance, right, to be able to get your life in order. Okay, there's a video here where we are talking about the Norwegian prison system. So the Norwegian prison system is essentially one that is heavily based on this idea of rehabilitation, right? And where the inmates, the offenders, the punishment, the epic punishment for them is that they have lost their sense of freedom, right? Their freedom is taken away. And to the Norwegians, that is actually enough as punishment. With corporal punishment or with capital punishment, that is slightly different. So with capital punishment, with corporal punishment, it really is based on this idea of justice, right, and fairness. Okay, with the idea of rehabilitation, the issue is often to do with mercy, right? Yes, they've committed a crime, they've done wrong, but you want to give them that second chance. So that's essentially what drives the focus of that sort of punishment. So these are all the different forms of punishment that you want to think about. Okay, generally speaking, I'm going to reiterate that point again. So when we are talking about rehabilitative punishment, we are always talking about mercy. And on top of that, you are always thinking about it from the focus or from the point of view of the offender. What is best for the offender? So it makes sense, right? Giving the offender a second chance is to give the offender another opportunity to right his own wrongs, right? To make a better life for himself. Okay, so that's what we are thinking about when we think about rehabilitation. But when we're thinking about capital or corporal punishment, it is not about the offender. It is always about the society. It is always about the victims. It is always about this idea of justice or fairness, right? So the offender has committed a crime, the offender needs to pay for the crime, and on top of that, the offender needs to actually be taken off the streets because that makes society safer. So if you allow the offender back on the streets, people will feel unsafe once again. So that's essentially the three forms of punishment, and you want to be able to think about it in these three different ways, right? And how each kind of punishment has a specific goal and has a specific rationale behind it. None of them are wrong, right? So if you're looking at it as rehabilitation, it's not wrong. right? So if you have a debate and you say, I'm against the death penalty, you are not wrong. If you are in a debate and you say, I am for the death penalty, you are also not wrong. It's just about the different lenses and the different perspectives that you're looking at it through. Now, the next few slides explain this, right? So what does it mean to be pro-rehabilitation? Okay, what does it mean to have this whole debate with regards to rehabilitation on the one hand and punishment on the other hand? Okay, so I'd like you to read through all this and then think about it in terms of death penalty and the death penalty essay. So then the next thing that you want to think about, and the biggest and most controversial issue that is often discussed with crime and punishment, has got to do with the death penalty. You can always consider or think about the death penalty in this way. The death penalty, are you for it? If you are for it, there is a reason behind it. Then you are looking at it in terms of deterrence. You are looking at it in terms of let's keep society safe. But if you're saying no to the death penalty, then you are looking at it from the point of view of the offender, and you are saying that there are actually other alternatives, and that you are also taking into consideration the offender's rights. Okay, last year especially, there was a lot of talk in Singapore about the death penalty because we executed quite a few people last year. I think we made up for all the time that we didn't execute people during COVID, which is not a nice thing either. Anyway, because of that, there was quite a lot of discussion about it, and there's a video here. Okay, there's a YouTube video about Singapore's death penalty. Okay, examples for you, right? Countries in the world that have death penalty and countries that have actually abolished the death penalty, have held it only for certain crimes or are using it for most crimes. Okay, so everything is relatively clear here. This is just an example for you. I think one very easy way of reading the map is to look at the concentrations of red and figure out what kinds of countries these are, right? And you can draw some sort of conclusion from that. The next aspect that we're going to be looking at here, and that you should be clear about because it's a very big deal when we're talking about Singapore, is Singapore's stand on the death penalty. So that's something for you to familiarize yourself with.
There are very heavy penalties if you're found with more than a stated number of grams of certain prohibited drugs. And if you still come in with a few kilos of them, which will destroy hundreds, thousands of families, one death is too kind.
And at the same time, arguments both for the death penalty. So for the death penalty, definitely you are on the side of justice. Arguments against the death penalty, you are looking at it from the point of view of the offender, and you're looking at it from the point of view of the offender being as human as the victim. So you can take a stand on either side, and you cannot be marked wrong as long as you are able to substantiate why you are on that side. Okay? All right, now the next question you want to ask yourself is also this idea of, is the justice system always a fair justice system? Does it unfairly penalize some? Does it allow others to get away with certain kinds of crime? Okay, so this is where you're talking about the larger issues behind the justice system. We're not talking about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system. We are talking a little bit about the ethics of how the criminal justice system is set up. We are talking about the blind spots in the criminal justice system. Okay, so there are certain assumptions that we have of the criminal justice system, right? Some of these assumptions would be the fact that it is fair, it will punish fairly. Whether or not it does so is going to be something that you will need to debate. Okay, so some things that you want to pay attention to when you're discussing whether or not the justice system is fair. One, this idea of wrongful convictions. And you realize that with wrongful convictions, okay, these statistics are very American, but you realize that with wrongful conditions, you are always thinking about how certain minorities often are seen as the usual suspects, and certain minorities will be seen to be or will be profiled as the ones more likely to commit crime. It's not just something in the United States. There are always minorities within a society that will always be the ones that people automatically associate with crime. So that's something that you need to be aware of, that the justice system itself, right? We always say, oh, justice is blind, meaning that it doesn't take into consideration how rich or how poor you are, what color your skin is, where you grew up, where you were born, that kind of thing. That's the ideal, that justice is blind, right? But that's not necessarily the case. Okay, we know this, and this is something that is currently being talked about again in the United States. It keeps being talked about because you're talking about this whole idea of racial bias and the police system in the US, right? The justice system. So we're talking about things like police brutality. Just this last week, the end of January in 2023, right? You have once again another case where an African American was pulled over at a stoplight, right? And he was beaten to death by police officers, 5 police officers. And strangely enough, you would assume that these 5 police officers, because they themselves are African American, it wouldn't be an issue. They shouldn't have been the ones, right? It used to be, oh, you know, we're thinking about white police officers that are beating up black suspects. But this is an African American suspect. And when the ambulance came and the first responders came, right, they stood around for another 15 minutes while waiting for the police officers to finish beating up this guy, right? So evidently this guy died a couple of days later. It has once again caused a lot of anger, but a lot of conversation about this idea of race, this idea of the police culture in the United States. Okay, so is it fair? Right? Will a white person that gets pulled over, is that white person likely to get beat up in the same way? Okay, so there's an article here, there's a link to an article here. It's very useful for you to go and read about. So it makes reference to Rodney King. Rodney King was also this African American man who was beat up in, I think, 1992. I think that was one of the first instances of footage of police officers beating up a suspect. Okay, the next thing you want to also consider, right, has got to do with whether or not technology is beneficial in solving crime. So we are assuming here that technology will definitely be beneficial, right? It will help with CCTV, with facial recognition, and all these sorts of things. But once again, does bias get built into the technology? Right, so the biases that we talked about earlier, right, do these things get built into the technology that is used to enforce peace, right, or to prevent crime in a neighborhood? So that's once again this idea of bias tainting. It's once again this idea of, do certain minority groups, do certain race groups become more susceptible to being punished or being arrested unfairly? We've talked about race, right, and how the justice system might actually be unfair along racial lines. We've talked about how technology, while supposedly being able to help improve safety within a society, right, could actually be used in unfair manner. Okay, and the last one you want to talk about is, right, for instance, Donald Trump, right, versus an unknown person. So these two different people, right, if they were arrested for the same thing, who might face more severe punishment? Okay, so the idea of, do powerful people, are they more likely to get away with crime? If they are, why? Right? Why is there this disparity? Why is there this unfairness? So is it truly fair? Right? Remember, we said the criminal justice system, punishment was supposed to be fair. But if punishment is unfair and allows some people to get away with things more easily, how is that fair? Okay, so that's something that you also want to think about in terms of whether or not the justice system is fair. All right? Okay, so that's about it. That's basically, in a nutshell, all the different things that you want to consider. If you have any additional questions, And if you need more help, you need more discussion, you need to bounce off some of these debates with your teachers, please sign up for consults with your teachers. Okay, so that's it. I hope this has been helpful. All the best, and I'll see you soon. That's it for today. Bye.